Leonard Blackwood had always been drawn to the unseen layers of the city. From his adolescence, he felt that every metropolis concealed intricate networks beneath its busy sidewalks, old subway lines, drainage tunnels, and service corridors long forgotten by most inhabitants. His curiosity about these spaces blossomed into an obsession with exploration. Over the years, he took part in countless nocturnal treks through abandoned train stations, deserted factories, and rusted catwalks. Sometimes he documented these journeys with his camera, hoping to share them on the internet for like-minded enthusiasts. Despite the inherent risks, he found that the promise of discovery, especially unearthing something that lingered outside typical knowledge, fueled his enthusiasm. By his early 30s, Leonard had assembled a close-knit group of friends and acquaintances who shared his passion for urban exploration. They came from diverse backgrounds. Some were students, others had day jobs in offices or shops, but all were united by a fascination with hidden architecture. This group was not large, yet it often changed composition from one exploration to the next. Over time, it came to include a talented amateur historian named Gil, a methodical and tech-savvy woman named Rhea, a fearless climber named Justin, and others. Leonard, however, was always the one who steered them toward the most obscure leads and rumored sites. In early autumn, he learned of a labyrinth of disused sewer tunnels that supposedly ran beneath an older part of the city. Official records in the local archives hinted that segments of this underground system had once been integrated with a half-finished subway project from the 1950s. Although local officials had stated that no accessible passageways remained, rumors suggested that a handful of entrances still existed, bricked over but passable for those bold enough to break through. Intrigued by the possibility of filming a new video for his urban exploration channel, Leonard began to collect more data. He cross-referenced map fragments with old municipal plans, then used satellite imagery to locate potential entry points. After about 2 weeks of detective work, Leonard believed he had identified a possible hidden hatch in a derelict neighborhood. The location was near a row of abandoned industrial warehouses along a canal that no longer served active shipping. The canal itself was partially drained, revealing a low water level thick with algae. The entire area exuded neglect. Its structures had peeling paint, broken windows, collapsed rooftops, and scattered debris. Almost no one ventured there willingly, except for the occasional vagrant or graffiti artist. Leonard felt that if an entrance still existed, it was likely to be found in one of the weed-choked lots or behind a battered fence. Well into October, he invited 3 companions to accompany him. The group included Rhea, whose technical abilities encompassed handling filming equipment and drones, Gil, who possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of local history, and Justin, who specialized in vertical work such as rappelling or climbing. Leonard intended to capture footage for an extended YouTube feature that would highlight the city's hidden underbelly. They converged on a Sunday, each bringing supplies appropriate for underground exploration: powerful flashlights, backup batteries, protective masks, gloves, ropes, and a crowbar. They hoped that thorough preparation would allow them to deal with rusted metal barriers or minor collapses. Their plan was to arrive before dawn, locate the rumored entrance, and descend slowly. Rhea would operate a handheld camera, and Leonard would also keep a smaller device clipped to his chest harness, ensuring continuous recording of anything unexpected. Gil had volunteered to keep notes in a small journal so that the group could track details of the layout and any intriguing architectural features. Justin, known for his courage, would take the lead in physically demanding tasks, such as removing obstacles or navigating confined shafts. The atmosphere that morning was ominous. The sky was overcast, the wind carried a faint chill, and a sense of anticipation permeated the group. They parked in a deserted lot near the old canal. Leonard studied the perimeter fence that enclosed one of the large, graffiti-laden warehouses. According to an aging municipal plan he had pored over, a sealed manhole might be located behind this structure at ground level near the back corner. The building, a relic of some earlier manufacturing period, loomed in silhouette, an imposing block of weathered brick with shattered windows. The entire area felt forsaken, as though modern life had shifted elsewhere. leaving behind only scattered remnants of the past. Littering the ground were broken bottles, scraps of metal, and heaps of wind-blown debris. The group advanced cautiously, stepping around puddles where rainwater had collected. Behind the warehouse, they discovered a small concrete depression, presumably designed at one time for drainage. Half hidden beneath leaves and dirt was a round metal cover, locked with a heavy chain. Examining it more closely, Leonard noted that the chain's link looked somewhat corroded, but not recently tampered with. He motioned for the others to stand back as he tried to pry it open. After some effort, Justin managed to crack the rusted link. Once the chain was removed, the cover could be lifted with combined force. A stale odor rose from below, reminiscent of damp stone and stagnant water. Before descending, they tested oxygen levels with a basic sensor Gil had brought along, verifying that the air below was not dangerously toxic, at least not at the entrance. One by one, they climbed down the metal rungs set into the concrete shaft. Their flashlights revealed a small chamber about 4 meters below ground, reinforced by bricks that were darkened with moisture. Rhea kept the camera rolling, capturing the entire descent. At the bottom, the group stood on a slippery floor. Turning in a slow circle, Leonard saw that the chamber had 2 visible exits, one leading into a narrower corridor, the other sealed by a collapsed wall of rubble. The corridor presumably extended toward the defunct sewer network. The place was silent except for water dripping in echoing intervals. Darkness loomed ahead, making them aware of how isolated they were from the surface. Gil took out his notebook and began to sketch an approximate map. While the others scanned the surroundings with flashlights, he wrote that the walls bore some official stenciling indicating service passages. Indeed, battered signs with cryptic numeric codes suggested that this location had once been a maintenance hub. The group advanced deeper along the corridor, stepping over puddles, forcing aside rusted bars, and occasionally stooping to avoid low-hanging pipes. After progressing roughly 50 meters, they reached a branching intersection. One corridor sloped gently downward. Another remained horizontal, but seemed half submerged in water. Leonard hesitated, consulting his partial map. He suggested that the downward route might connect to old sewer lines. The group agreed to proceed with caution, keeping track of the path behind them by marking the walls with small pieces of colored tape. This measure would help them retrace their steps if the layout proved confusing. As they moved along, the corridor's curvature increased, and the structural style changed. The bricks gave way to older masonry, possibly from an earlier construction era. The floor was coated with a slippery film, forcing them to move slowly. Justin used a pole to probe the path ahead, testing for hidden holes. Then, beneath the harsh white beams of their flashlights, they noticed something etched on the walls. Faint lines, almost invisible at first glance. Rhea zoomed in with the camera's lens. She realized that these lines formed peculiar symbols, circles intersected by geometric shapes, small crosses, and sharp angles reminiscent of runic characters. Some had been carved or burned into the brick. Others appeared to be painted on with a black, tar-like substance. The effect was eerie. Gil bent over one of the inscriptions and tried to identify any linguistic pattern, but recognized nothing similar to known alphabets. The arrangement seemed methodical, as though each symbol corresponded to a coded message. Leonard felt his pulse accelerate. Even with all his prior explorations, he had rarely encountered anything so deliberately cryptic. Usually, old tunnels contained graffiti tags, the occasional gang marking, or notes left by vagrants. This was different. The lines projected a haunting sense of purpose. He began to question whether local legends of a hidden subculture practicing arcane rituals might hold some truth. He recalled stumbling upon forum posts, unreliable, perhaps, about gatherings taking place in sealed tunnels, but had never found tangible proof. Moving further, the group discovered more symbols. Some included sets of numbers that resembled dates. A few sequences looked like years, 2031, 2045, but these were obviously in the future. Others were shorter strings that might have been days or months. Gil diligently copied them, along with the shapes, into his notebook. Even if it turned out to be a prank, these engravings displayed an odd consistency. Meanwhile, a pervasive hush filled the corridor. The air felt denser, almost as if the weight of the soil and concrete above was pressing in. The only sounds were the team members' footsteps, their breathing, and the drip of water from overhead pipes. Eventually, they reached a half-collapsed threshold that opened into a larger subchamber. Judging by the architecture, it might have been an old distribution node where sewage or drainage flows were managed. The room extended in a rough circle, with multiple smaller tunnels diverging from its perimeter. Some were obstructed by debris or heavy iron gates that had rusted shut. The center of the chamber featured a raised metal platform. This platform, once used for controlling flow valves, had partially caved in. Exploring the edges of this chamber, Rhea paused at an especially elaborate section of wall. Her flashlight revealed a sprawling depiction, a tapestry of symbols repeated in different sizes, forming a symmetrical, circular arrangement. This pattern reminded Gil of something akin to a sigil, like an alchemical or magical seal. To his astonishment, the structure looked carefully planned, not mere random scrawling. Multiple interlocking circles and lines encompassed a triangular figure in the center, surrounded by numerals. In addition to that design, the wall displayed lines of text in an unknown script. The characters possessed a spidery quality, each letter featuring strokes that branched out in sharp angles. Among these strange lines, Gil spotted fragments that resembled partially recognized letters or symbols from ancient alphabets. He thought of old Semitic scripts or obscure runes, though no direct correlation was obvious. While he tried to interpret the shapes, Rhea continued filming, zooming in to capture every detail. A tense excitement swept through the group. Leonard felt a surge of conflicting emotions: discovery, caution, and fascination. He recalled hearing rumors of cult-like gatherings in neglected city understructures, though such stories were typically dismissed as sensational. Now, confronted with these meticulously crafted symbols and an incomprehensible script, he started to wonder if a hidden group was genuinely at work here, leaving cryptic marks for reasons beyond mere vandalism. The idea of a hidden purpose only grew stronger as Justin investigated the corner near the platform. On a slanted surface, he discovered a cluster of burned candles arranged in a rough circle. The wax lumps were dusty, but not enough to suggest they had been there for decades. A faint charred smell still clung to the air. Nearby, Justin also found a small metal dish with black residue, possibly from burned substances. The group suspected that rituals, or at least staged performances, had taken place in this chamber. Suddenly, a gentle vibration rippled through the air, like a muted rumble. Everyone stood still, scanning the walls. It was not a strong quake, but more like an underground resonance, as though something deeper in the labyrinth had shifted or an old ventilation duct had collapsed. The unsettled water on the floor quivered. The flicker of their flashlights heightened the chamber's uncanny ambiance. Leonard, unsettled by the vibration, gestured that they should remain alert and consider how far they wanted to continue. Gil felt a mounting anxiety, but the promise of further discoveries pulled at him. He wanted to see if the underground extended beyond these structures or if a sublevel could reveal the origin of such disturbing inscriptions. Rhea checked her watch to gauge how much time had passed since their descent. It was easy to lose track in these dim corridors. Then, she resumed filming. Leonard pointed out a narrow passage that sloped downward, partially obscured by broken beams. He suspected it led deeper, perhaps to an older portion of the system. Curiosity, combined with the sense that they had already uncovered something extraordinary, compelled them onward. Pressing on required removing debris. Justin used the crowbar to shift aside beams. The air smelled stale, akin to stagnant water with undertones of mildew, and grew colder. Each step reverberated in the sealed environment. The sense of isolation became intense, as though they were departing the known world and entering a subterranean realm shaped by someone else's design. After crawling through a cramped segment, they emerged into yet another corridor. Its ceiling was lower, and the walls had changed in texture. Large, irregular stones replaced uniform bricks. Some areas bore mortar that had eroded, leaving gaps. Water seeped through from above, forming rivulets along the walls. Moving deeper, they discovered a series of smaller sigils drawn along the corridor's sides at close intervals. Many were duplicates of what they had seen in the main chamber. Repeated motifs of circles, triangles, and looping lines formed a language of sorts. Occasionally, the travelers noted fresh scuff marks on the floor, as if individuals had traveled here recently. The footprints were inconsistent in size. Some might belong to boots, others to lighter shoes. The group understood that, even if these tunnels were officially abandoned, they were not entirely deserted. The possibility of encountering strangers was real. Leonard found himself torn between the thrill of discovering more evidence for his video and the caution that they might stumble upon individuals with questionable motives. As they proceeded, exhaustion from the mental strain and physical efforts to navigate cramped spaces began to take hold. Gil tried to keep meticulous records, but the environment and the group's growing unease caused him to miss some details. Occasionally, he glimpsed faint reflections or shimmering movement in his peripheral vision, but when he turned his flashlight, he saw only wet stone and swirling dust particles. He began to suspect that the oppressive darkness was playing tricks on him. Others also grew uneasy, though no one spoke any words to confirm it. They shared glances laced with the same silent apprehension. Farther along, the team encountered a larger archway that opened into what looked like a small junction or intersection. The area contained two wide openings. One was partially collapsed, the other severely flooded. The water's surface glistened. Small piles of debris and silt formed ridges along the edges. At the far side of this pool, the walls displayed an intricate arrangement of glyphs, some large, some small, all forming an unreadable mosaic. Leonard drew closer, shining his flashlight over the watery gap to better see the markings. The patterns were mesmerizing. He noticed that some of the shapes resembled stylized eyes, each surrounded by swirling lines that reached to the edges of the stone. Unable to contain a rising sense of curiosity, Leonard used a piece of scrap metal to gauge the water's depth at the edge. It turned out to be surprisingly shallow, barely knee-high close to the perimeter, though presumably deeper near the center. Justin tested the ground with caution. If the group tried to wade through, they might reach the far wall and document the largest set of symbols. The risk was that hidden holes or uneven terrain might cause a sudden plunge. Justin carefully advanced, using his flashlight to check the water. Rhea continued recording, capturing the ripple patterns. Halfway across, Justin's step sank deeper than expected. He had to shift his weight quickly, sending a splash across the murky surface. For a moment, an undercurrent of fear gripped the group. Fortunately, he managed to recover and keep his footing. Reaching the opposite side, he pressed up against the wall, giving Rhea enough vantage with her camera to zoom in. Gil, staying on the drier side, took sketches. Leonard continued scanning the environment with anxious excitement. That was when they noticed yet another baffling element. In the center of these elaborate glyphs, someone had carved a date, the current year, followed by a future year that was still more than a decade away. Next to these lines, in the same scratchy script, was a phrase that neither Gil nor the others could decipher. It included repeated references to days and months that had not yet arrived. The presence of future timelines felt ominous, as if whoever created the sigils claimed knowledge of coming events. The partial sentences seemed to combine references to catastrophe or transformation. That realization prompted Leonard to question whether they were looking at the twisted fantasies of an obscure cult or something that transcended rational explanation. Gil's mind raced with speculation, recalling conspiracies he had once read about time prophecies, multi-generational secret societies, or doomsday predictions scrawled on hidden walls. His rational side insisted that these writings were simply the product of superstitious thinking. Yet an undercurrent of dread persisted, fueled by the strange and near-hypnotic arrangement of the symbols. Rhea, usually level-headed, appeared uncharacteristically agitated, adjusting her camera with nervous energy. The group decided to spend a few more minutes capturing visuals of the wall, then retreat to the main corridor to reassess. However, as soon as they turned away from the symbolic mosaic, a flickering light appeared at the far end of the junction. The glow lasted only a moment, but it was enough for them to notice. No one spoke, yet they collectively understood that this glimmer could indicate another presence, or it could be some effect of their flashlights' beams reflecting off the water. Regardless, a thread of caution entangled their curiosity. They recognized that these tunnels were not entirely stable or secure, and they had no desire to become trapped in a confrontation. They carefully withdrew, returning along the corridor that had led them there. As they retraced their steps, they discovered new, disquieting details. The previously damp walls now seemed slicker with condensation, as though the subterranean environment were transforming. The group also felt subtle changes in temperature. Certain pockets of air were decidedly colder, as if they were passing through invisible curtains of chill. Footsteps echoed behind them more loudly than before, even though they tried to proceed quietly. Each corner or branching corridor heightened the sense that the labyrinth might shift and rearrange itself at any moment, leaving them lost. Justin, typically fearless, looked tense, as if he too felt that the underground environment was warping around them. After several minutes, the group returned to the large circular chamber with the raised platform. They paused there to gather their bearings. Gil flipped through his notes, verifying that they had recorded enough to produce a coherent map. Rhea checked her camera battery, noticing that it had drained at an unusually fast rate. She had started with a full charge, but the device was already close to empty, which was atypical for her equipment. Under normal circumstances, the battery would have lasted much longer. She switched to a backup, perplexed by the abrupt depletion. Leonard began to sense an odd tension in the air, as if these spaces were impregnated with more than mere gloom. His intuition told him that the group had seen enough. The images, the cryptic writing, and the strange sense of presence in these corridors all pointed to something that was beyond normal explanation. He wanted to leave, examine their footage, and determine if it revealed anomalies or if their minds had conjured illusions in the darkness. Yet as they prepared to head back to the exit corridor, everyone sensed a sudden wave of vertigo or dizziness, an unsteady shift in equilibrium. It was slight, but enough to prompt Gil to nearly drop his notebook. The effect passed, but a series of soft, echoing knocks resonated from somewhere in the tunnels, as though distant footsteps tapped methodically against stone. Spooked but resolute, the group hurried toward the corridor that led them here, counting on the colored tape they had placed earlier. They retraced their route step by step. To their relief, the tape markers were still visible on the walls. Each piece guided them through the labyrinth until they returned to the intersection near the original downward slope. As they approached that corner, they noticed that a section of the corridor looked different than when they had first arrived. A piece of piping now lay on the ground, blocking part of the path, even though they had not seen it earlier. Treading carefully, they confirmed that the tape path was correct, so they continued forward. Eventually, they saw the faint glow of daylight filtering in from the entrance shaft. Anxiety turned to relief. They climbed the corroded metal rungs until they emerged into the stale yet relatively open air behind the warehouse. After hours spent underground, the late afternoon sky, though clouded, felt like a reprieve. The group replaced the manhole cover and resecured it to obscure the fact that it had been tampered with, not wanting to attract undue attention. Then they loaded their gear and themselves into their vehicle. Each felt the weight of exhaustion and the swirl of unresolved questions pressing on their minds. Back at Leonard's apartment, they had planned to review the recorded footage. Once they arrived, the four of them shed their boots and damp clothing and gathered around Rhea's laptop. She transferred the camera files onto a portable drive. They discovered that segments of the footage contained odd distortions, glitches, pixelation, and unexplained flickers that had not been apparent while filming. In certain frames, lights shimmered faintly around the edges of the carved symbols. Another portion showed, in the corner of the shot, what appeared to be a faint silhouette. Whether it was a real figure or an artifact of the lighting was unclear. Gil studied the frames intensively, trying to isolate the anomalies. Meanwhile, Leonard recognized that if they intended to release this content online, it would spark a wave of speculation, from conspiracy theories to accusations of fakery. They then examined the smaller camera attached to Leonard's chest harness. Its audio had captured an unusual series of reverberations, akin to a low droning hum, overlapping with the group's footsteps in the deeper corridors. None of them recalled hearing that hum in real time. This phenomenon increased in volume whenever the camera lens passed over the largest sigils. At times, the hum rose high enough to drown out normal background noise, then faded away just as quickly. The presence of these inexplicable sounds intensified their suspicion that the symbols were more than random scrawls. They also discovered a moment near the final chamber where Gil's camera angle caught Justin's reflection in the water, yet the shape next to him seemed elongated or misshapen. The team disagreed on whether it was a trick of perspective or the possibility of some unknown presence standing behind him. The combined evidence made Rhea uneasy. She worried about the ramifications of uploading such disturbing material, particularly if it attracted individuals with extreme beliefs. Gil tried to adopt a more analytical attitude, describing the entire find as a puzzle that might be decrypted by an expert in ancient scripts or esoteric studies. Leonard felt torn between excitement and trepidation. On one hand, the footage was sensational enough to gather massive attention. On the other hand, they had no idea what or whom they might provoke. He considered the possibility that a secretive sect or group performed rituals involving these tunnels and might not appreciate having its domain exposed. In the subsequent days, the sense of disquiet did not diminish. Each member of the group reported experiencing odd dreams. Leonard, in particular, dreamed of labyrinthine corridors shifting beneath his feet, the walls covered in glowing runes that pulsed to the rhythm of his heartbeat. He woke repeatedly, soaked in sweat, with the final echoes of a distant voice ringing in his mind. The content of these nightmares was too nebulous to describe precisely, but it left him unsettled. Gil immersed himself in library research. He sought references to city legends describing mystical gatherings in underground spaces. He found occasional anecdotal mentions in local newspapers from decades past about teenagers stumbling upon strange graffiti in old storm drains, as well as secondhand claims of robed figures chanting in restricted areas. None of these scraps of information offered real proof, but they formed a patchwork of rumors that paralleled what the group had seen with their own eyes. Gil also investigated ancient alphabets, hoping to match the sigils. He discovered superficial resemblances to certain runic or Proto-Semitic letters, but nothing that formed coherent words. Some shapes matched no known system. The complexity of the script suggested that it was either wholly invented or connected to an obscure practice beyond mainstream knowledge. As the team debated their next move, Rhea discovered that multiple external hard drives used to store their raw footage had developed errors and corrupted files. This glitch was baffling since the drives were new and had shown no prior issues. Whatever data remained was partially salvageable, but the most vividly anomalous sections seemed compromised or damaged. Leonard and Gil took it as a sign that intangible forces or simply freak accidents were complicating their efforts. Rhea recalled that her battery had drained rapidly in the tunnels, making her wonder if the environment there caused electrical disruptions. In the meantime, Justin privately visited the site again out of curiosity. He did so in broad daylight, alone, though he only peered over the manhole's edge without descending. When he returned, he seemed disturbed, mentioning that there were new footprints near the entrance. Someone had likely gone in or out since their initial visit. The fresh tracks, upon inspection, led away into the weed-choked property, vanishing behind the warehouse. Justin wondered whether a second group of explorers had arrived after hearing about their discovery, or if a caretaker of sorts monitored the place. He advised the others that returning without a strategic plan might be unwise. At night, Leonard found himself growing anxious, glancing out his apartment window as though expecting to see suspicious figures. He began noticing small events that might have been coincidences or might have indicated that someone was observing him. Unknown cars parked near his building, repeated phone calls that ended in silence, or shadows flickering under the street lamp across the road. His rational mind reminded him that he might be overreacting. Urban paranoia was common among those who rummaged through off-limits sites. Nonetheless, the entire chain of experiences since exploring the tunnels pointed toward hidden aspects of the city that he had never encountered in his previous forays. After extensive deliberation, The group decided that they would not publicly release all of their footage immediately. They felt they lacked crucial context and dreaded that sensational coverage might lead other thrill seekers into a potentially hazardous environment. However, Leonard wanted to produce a short documentary focusing on the architecture and partially censored details of the symbols, enough to spark interest while withholding the location. Gill reluctantly agreed, hoping that outside experts who recognized the style might come forward. The others insisted on disclaimers emphasizing the dangers of exploring sealed tunnels. As Leonard worked on editing the short piece, he isolated frames that displayed the largest sigils. Studying them under zoom and color correction, he noticed subtle patterns embedded in the design, as though the outer circles contained hidden characters that repeated in intervals. The arrangement resembled a cyclical code, possibly hinting at a calendar or schedule. Combining the partial references to future dates discovered in the corridor, he speculated that whoever created the sigils was anticipating certain events, maybe aligning them with the city's subterranean geometry. Such speculation felt alarmingly plausible. Weeks elapsed, and a subdued tension lingered in the group. Gill occasionally confided in Leonard that he experienced fleeting vertigo even above ground, accompanied by a sense that his surroundings flickered for a split second, as though reality faltered. Rhea, though initially calm, found herself unnerved by repeated equipment malfunctions. Even simple tasks like charging her camera battery sometimes failed without reason. She had also begun hearing faint whispers while editing audio from the tunnels, as if barely perceptible voices were layered beneath the hum. She could not tell if it was a trick of frequencies or if the microphone had captured something intangible. Justin remained the most guarded, typically brushing off talk of the supernatural. However, even he admitted that the entire experience underground had felt heavier than typical exploration. He suggested they investigate a second time, only with better gear, protective measures, and possibly even official permission, though that last step seemed impossible. No city agency would sanction them entering dangerous old tunnels. He also felt apprehensive about crossing paths with unknown individuals who had carved or continued to maintain those bizarre markings. Then, out of the blue, Leonard discovered an unmarked envelope slipped under his apartment door. Within it lay a single page containing a photocopy of the same style of sigils they had observed, accompanied by typed lines in an unfamiliar language. At the bottom was a short line in English, a warning or statement telling him that those symbols were gates or barriers. He could not confirm the note's source or meaning, but it indicated that their investigation had not gone unnoticed. If the reference to gates or barriers was accurate, it implied that the purpose of the script was to either allow something in or keep something out. The implications were staggering. Startled, Leonard contacted Gill to show him the envelope. Gill concluded that they were dealing with individuals who might be guarding a set of beliefs or a tradition carried on secretly in the city's underbelly. These unknown watchers evidently did not fear intimidation or exposure, and they were likely far more familiar with the labyrinth than any casual explorers. This thought cast a somber pall over the group, raising questions about how many clandestine networks thrived beneath daily life. In an attempt to gain more clarity, Gill arranged a private conversation with an acquaintance from the university who specialized in ancient languages and folklore. He showed this academic a carefully edited version of the sigils. The individual commented that the shapes appeared reminiscent of certain occult diagrams from medieval grimoires, but many details did not match any known traditions. Possibly, the script was a newly devised cipher drawing on archaic symbols. The academic found the references to future dates particularly puzzling, suspecting it might reflect a syncretic belief system involving predictions or cyclical timelines. Ultimately, the academic could provide no conclusive identification. By this stage, the group recognized that the question exceeded mere curiosity about an off-limits tunnel network. They had stumbled upon evidence that a hidden group, well-versed in cryptic designs, was operating beneath the city. The significance of the dates implied a long-term plan or expectation. Even though no overt threat had materialized, each explorer perceived an unspoken menace in the secrecy. If the watchers believed the group had glimpsed something forbidden, how would they react? At that critical juncture, Leonard began experiencing recurring nightmares that always led him back into those tunnels. In his dreams, he wandered alone, hearing distant dripping sounds, passing by walls covered in blinking sigils that seemed alive. The deeper he went, the more the symbols pulsed with a dull red glow. Sometimes, in a flash, he would see a figure at the end of a corridor. The figure reached out with a hand bearing the same runic lines carved into its flesh. The dream would end with a jolt, leaving Leonard gasping for air in his bed. He found it impossible to ignore the effect that a single foray into the subterranean domain had on his psyche. Rhea and Gil admitted to similarly distressing experiences, fleeting hallucinations, intrusive thoughts, and an unshakable feeling that they were being observed. Justin, outwardly stoic, grew uncharacteristically silent about the matter, preferring not to dwell on it, though Leonard suspected that he too was grappling with unspoken anxieties. Tensions within the group rose, culminating in a collective hesitation about continuing the investigation. Eventually, Leonard posted a carefully edited documentary segment to his channel. He concealed the exact location and altered the audio to remove the hum. The video drew significant attention, fueling speculation among viewers. Many recognized the potential references to esoteric symbols, with some claiming that these were summoning signs, while others thought them to be warding or sealing glyphs. Conspiracy-minded commentators latched onto the notion that the city's underbelly housed a clandestine society, preparing for events correlated with the future dates. Skeptics, however, argued that the entire scenario was an elaborate hoax devised for internet fame, pointing to the absence of official records or documented evidence by city authorities. Within days, Leonard received numerous messages from strangers claiming specialized knowledge. Some asked for the exact coordinates. Others advised him to destroy the footage to avoid unleashing forces beyond his comprehension. A few messages verged on threatening or unhinged. The swirl of online chatter only deepened the group's uncertainty. They had touched on a subject that generated intense reactions, yet they remained no closer to genuine answers. The tension in Leonard's life grew acute, and he was forced to question whether his thirst for hidden truths had endangered not only his mental well-being, but also the safety of his companions. Shortly thereafter, Rhea discovered that her laptop had sustained a catastrophic drive failure. She lost multiple archives of raw footage from the exploration. A backup existed on an external device, but that too showed corruption, making it near impossible to reconstruct certain critical segments. Gil's notebook sketches became the only thorough record of the arrangement of sigils. As though multiple coincidences converged to stifle clarity, the group found themselves with partial data. The talk of returning underground to gather better evidence sparked stark disagreements. Rhea wanted to keep investigating, but Justin insisted that to do so without official oversight was reckless. Gil hovered between curiosity and dread, acknowledging that every attempt to decipher the script or locate the people behind it might lead them deeper into a realm of intangible hazards. All the while, intermittent events reinforced the notion that the group was not alone. Leonard occasionally caught glimpses of people lurking near his apartment building, and once, he came home to find an unmarked black envelope on his coffee table, even though the door had been locked. Inside was a single photograph of the large circular sigil from the main chamber, accompanied by lines in that same unknown script. No explanation, no context. The infiltration of his apartment left him rattled, uncertain how someone had gained entry. Reporting it to the police might have accomplished little, given the lack of standard proof of a break-in. Moreover, he felt uneasy drawing law enforcement into a matter so rife with supernatural connotations. The group's communications gradually began to decline. Rhea immersed herself in digital security protocols. Gil turned to the campus library's archives to see if the city had any mention of older societies or organizations that once used cryptic markings. Justin avoided them for a stretch, focusing on his day job and family, anxious to distance himself from an obsession that might yield no resolution. Leonard watched his channel statistics climb while he wrestled with moral apprehensions. The public partial revelation of the subterranean sigils had triggered a wave of imitators. individuals venturing into other city tunnels, posting videos of random graffiti, and proclaiming they too had discovered magical symbols. Rumors flared across social media about an impending event that these sigils supposedly heralded. In truth, the real inscriptions discovered by Leonard's group remained veiled from easy replication. The newly posted footage from random explorers seemed trivial or contrived. Still, it unsettled him to see how swiftly curiosity could morph into mania. The possibility that the Watchers themselves might clamp down on these imitators weighed on him. As time wore on, the group's psychological strain manifested in different ways. Leonard suffered from bouts of anxiety. The fear of hidden Watchers or intangible forces pressed upon him. Gil uncovered references to secret societies from centuries past, but found no direct correlation to their modern city. Rhea considered the possibility that they were dealing with an obscure doomsday cult, its members performing arcane rites with no real supernatural validity, yet harnessing enough conviction to create an aura of power. Justin, for his part, confessed that he occasionally felt as if he was seeing faint inscriptions on everyday surfaces, as though the runes had burned themselves into his mind's eye. Ultimately, they realized that pressing further might lead them into escalating danger or mental instability. The group agreed, with reluctance, to maintain a low profile. They paused their public updates, locked away Gil's original sketches, and decided not to revisit the tunnels. Over the following months, contact among them dwindled, each person grappling privately with residual unease. Every so often, small reminders would surface, bizarre emails from strangers referencing future dates, partial translations that made little sense, or dreams that conjured images of infinite subterranean corridors. The city rolled along above them, ignorant of the labyrinth beneath its streets. Commuters hurried about their daily routines, oblivious to the flickering patches of darkness underfoot, where cryptic sigils adorned walls in twisting lines. No public institution admitted to knowledge of a group safeguarding the old corridors, nor acknowledged any cryptic language waiting to be deciphered. The Watchers, if they indeed existed, remained elusive. The group's last conclusion, though intangible, was that some mysteries were not meant to be fully unearthed by casual explorers. The subterranean environment, layered with centuries of shifting architecture, provided the perfect domain for secrets older than conventional memory, or, at the very least, for illusions forged by the city's myriad shadows. Thus, Leonard's final reflection was one of unresolved tension. He had pursued the excitement of exploring hidden realms, only to find that certain corners of the urban landscape bristled with forces or individuals who defied easy explanation. The marks on the walls continued to exist, scrawled in tar-like substance and etched into the stone, referencing unguessable futures and languages that no academic recognized. Perhaps the Watchers used them as wards, orchestrating an invisible system beneath the metropolis. Perhaps they aimed to summon intangible energies that they believed would manifest at specific times. Perhaps the entire phenomenon was a grand psychological puzzle. Regardless of the explanation, the labyrinth's labyrinthine silence and the lingering sense of an unseen presence had convinced Leonard that not every door needed to be forced open, nor every passage thoroughly illuminated. He reminded himself that caution was, at times, the wisest approach. There was a point at which curiosity, however noble, might trespass on boundaries best left undisturbed. Even so, the memory of those symbols and the hush of the drowned corridors haunted him, a quiet testament to the idea that the world remained deeper and more cryptic than most people would ever know. Whenever he closed his eyes, he could still see the faint outlines of circles within circles, each line pointing to another link in a chain of secrets that wound far below the city's busy streets. The deeper meaning eluded him, and perhaps that was for the best. The Watchers, or some intangible aspect of the labyrinth, likely took comfort in that mystery remaining unresolved. In the end, the knowledge they carried could neither be disproven nor fully explained. Those carved and painted sigils below ground persisted in memory, silently reminding them that while the city's lights and bustle formed one realm, an older, darker realm slumbered beneath it. Over time, dust would accumulate, and water would continue dripping across the cryptic text, slowly obscuring the script from any future explorers. Or perhaps new lines would be added, updating the runes to reflect events yet to come. If so, neither Leonard nor his companions intended to bear witness to that next chapter. They had witnessed enough to recognize that the subterranean mysteries demanded a price of understanding that they were unprepared to pay. And so, the labyrinth beneath the city remained sealed within their collective memory, haunted by intangible echoes, watched by unseen eyes, and marked by symbols that defied explanation.